Hi, this is 100 and 100, where we are reviewing 100 VR games in 100 days. Today we're looking at Ghost Town Mine Ride and Shooting Gallery, and this one is a trip. Ghost Town Mine Ride and Shooting Gallery is positioned as an entertainment theme park ride that you're visiting as a guest to a ghost town. But things quickly turn south when you get further into the ride and your mine car goes off track and you're confronted with a whole bunch of really scary stuff. This one's a lot of fun and we're excited to review it with you today. In our VR Gear game reviews, we like to cover as many aspects of the game as possible so you can make an informed decision before you try or buy one of these VR titles. We're excited to talk about Ghost Town Mine Ride today, and we're going to start with getting up and running with this game. The game is available on the Viveport Infinity subscription, and that's where we got it. It's also available on the Steam store, but it is not available in the Oculus store or for PSVR, so pick your store accordingly. The download file is about 8 gigabytes in size, which means it'll take a good amount of time to download on a normal internet connection. Once download is complete and installation happens, which should happen automatically, you'll be able to get into the game and start playing the Ghost Town Mine Ride, which starts with you riding in a mine car through an abandoned mine that is filled with targets to shoot at. This is, after all, a shooting gallery, and it was designed to have targets that you could shoot at. But things start to get really scary when you find that it's not just a theme park ride that was designed to be haunted, but that it is actually haunted and people are actually trying to take your life if you don't defend yourself. Ghost Town Mine Ride is a shooter on rails that becomes a first-person shooter on foot as you get further into the game. It's about a 25-minute experience from beginning to end, and you can take longer if you'd like to, but that's what the game developers have said is the average amount of time that it takes to get through the entire experience. You'll play this game from the first-person perspective, and all you'll see during gameplay is your gun in your right hand and your flashlight in your left hand. The rest of it is the mine car that you're riding in, or the world that you are interacting with. But you won't see much of yourself. There's no utility belt, there's no reloading of the gun. Everything just kind of is automatic and attached to your invisible hands and arms, a gun in the right hand and a flashlight in the left. The story behind Ghost Town Mine Ride is that this fun attraction was built inside of an abandoned mine as a fun, scary shooting gallery similar to a haunted house that you would go through at Disneyland or other theme parks. Some people claim, according to the game developers, that the mine is actually haunted, and you as a rider of this attraction soon find out that it really is haunted. And fortunately, the gun that you're given for the shooting gallery and the flashlight that you have on hand is sufficient to fight off the bad guys, the undead, the scary giant rats, the skeletons, the mine that's caving in, and everything else that's going wrong once the ride goes off the rails. The controls of this game are very simple, and that's very appropriate for this type of game. There's no complex reloading or holstering your weapon. It's just attached to your hand the whole time, and using it is simply pulling the trigger. On your left hand, that control is designated for the flashlight, and the flashlight is always on, and it also helps with where you're going to move next when you're finally on foot. You point the flashlight in the direction you'd like to go, and to move that direction, you hold down the trigger, and that's it. That is the essence of the controls. The only thing you need to do in addition to pulling the trigger to fire your weapon is to occasionally reload. And to reload, you simply touch the touchpad and your gun reloads and you're ready to fire again. Controls are simple, and that's very appropriate for a title just like this one. For music and sound, this game was really creepy, and getting the audio right is very important when you're trying to scare people. We were definitely scared, and that means they did the audio just right. There was a very faint soundtrack in the background to add some mood, but the sounds that you would hear in the mine were really scary, and they were very well done by the game developers. Creaking, shuffling of feet, breaking of wood, all sorts of different sounds like rats squeaking and squealing, and skeleton bones clamoring and clunking together or falling to the ground in a heap. All of this was very well done by the developers, and the sound really added to the immersion and to the horror aspect of this game. For player movement, the first part of this game is done completely for you. All of your movement is dictated by the rail car that you are sitting in as you're moving through the shooting gallery. But once you get out of the rail car and you begin moving on foot, your movement is achieved by pointing your flashlight in a direction and holding down the trigger to move in that direction. There's no teleportation, it's just player movement. This type of movement can cause some motion sickness for some people, especially those that are new to VR, but moving through the game has two different modes. In the rail car, which is automatic, and moving via direction of the flashlight while pulling the trigger. For motion sickness, this game doesn't have a lot of motion sickness in the first part of it. And that's because it's a shooter on rails and you're sitting in a train car and the movement is constant. You might change direction a few times, which could possibly... You do change direction in the rail car a few times because the track will take you down a different path. But other than that, you are in a very predictable motion state for the first part of the game. So motion sickness is minimized. When you hit the part of the game where you will then move forward on foot, that's when motion sickness can become an issue for some of the newer people who haven't done VR very much, or people who are just generally sensitive to motion sickness. This game does not have a teleportation movement system like others, and depending on who you ask, teleportation can cause less motion sickness or more. That's all subjective to whoever you're going to talk to. But the player movement of the second part of the game is where you'll experience motion sickness if you're sensitive to it, because you're moving through space on foot based on the direction you're pointing the flashlight, and that visual movement not mapping to your physical movement is what will cause motion sickness for those that are sensitive to it. The game developers do acknowledge this. They do say in the game description that if you are sensitive to motion sickness, this is a fast-paced horror game and you are likely to get motion sick if you're sensitive to it. We felt it. We made sure we were sensitive to it so that we could tell you all about it. You'll get motion sick in this game in the second half if you're not acclimated to VR. For environment and immersion, this game was kind of a mixed bag because you couldn't really see a lot of what was going on once you hit the part where you're walking around on foot. During the shooting gallery part, you knew what to expect, and the game delivered quite well there. The targets were colored, there were red targets on them, and you knew that you needed to face forward or turn to the left or right, find a target, and fire your gun. Once you got off of the rail car and into the mine on foot, that's when things started to go a little sideways for us. It was confusing what objective we were supposed to achieve. It was difficult to see because the only thing that was illuminated was where we would point our flashlight, and as a result, we wanted to just get out of the VR experience out of frustration, not necessarily out of fear, or maybe that's just what we'll tell people. We weren't too scared to keep playing. The reality is the immersion gets broken when players get frustrated, and that's exactly what happened to us. We weren't quite sure how to get out of the mine, and it wasn't because they were trying to trap us there, or maybe they were, but we didn't know how to progress, and the game got frustrating, and so that's how we experienced the break in the immersion, and the environment contributed to that breaking of the immersion. Otherwise, the environment and the immersion were really fantastic. They were very compelling, convincing. We were startled. Some of us screamed when there were some things that caused us to jump, and it was overall a very immersive experience. Again, what breaks immersion is when you feel frustrated at whatever the game is trying to get you to accomplish. All right, now let's look at the overall scorecard for Ghost Town Mine Ride and Shooting Gallery. This was a fun one. We really enjoyed it, and the story and theme is the first thing we rated. We are giving this game an 8 out of 10 for story and theme. As advertised, the game really does a great job telling the story of an abandoned mine that was turned into a shooting gallery that was suspected to be haunted and in fact is haunted. The story and theme of this game were really well done, and we're giving it the high score of 8 out of 10. For controls in this game, we are giving this game a 7 out of 10. That's a pretty high score for controls, especially since there really are just 3 different inputs. firing your weapon, reloading your weapon, and pointing the direction you'd like to move with your flashlight. And that's it. We like simple controller inputs, especially when the game doesn't require more, and that allows us to be more immersed in the game. And so a 7 out of 10 for controls in this game. For music and sound in this game, we are giving it an 8 out of 10. That's a really high score, and that's because this game did a really great job by paying attention to how important the audio is in a horror experience, just like this one. So an 8 out of 10 for music and sound. For player movement, we're giving this game a 6 out of 10. That's a little above average, and part of that has to do with the two different movement mechanisms. The first one, just fine, shooter on rails. But when you get out of the mine cart and start walking around, that's when the player movement really takes a turn for the worst. The continuous movement rather than the teleportation, and also the disorientation you experience because the only way to move is to point the flashlight in the direction you'd like to move. All of this makes for a somewhat disjointed player movement system, and so a 6 out of 10 for player movement. For motion sickness, we're giving this game a 6 out of 10. Motion sickness happens in the second part of the game, and that all has to do with the type of player movement that is incorporated when you're on foot. The first part of the game, motion sickness will be kept to a minimum. You're in a rail car that's fixed and you're moving at a constant rate. When you get on foot, that's when motion sickness comes in, and so a 6 out of 10 for motion sickness. For environment and immersion, we're giving this game a pretty good score of 7 out of 10. This game was really compelling. You felt like you were in a mine. You definitely were trying to dodge obstacles and not get killed by the oncoming zombies, the undead, the ghost, whatever else was in that mine. The sound did a great job of adding to the immersion of this one. So a 7 out of 10 for environment and immersion. Okay, for the overall score for Ghost Town Mine Ride and Shooting Gallery, we're giving this a really good score of 7 out of 10. We really felt this game was immersive. The game developers did a great job of incorporating some really high quality audio, and we really did feel what the game developers wanted us to feel. We were scared. This is a great horror experience. It wasn't too intense, but it was definitely intense enough to make us jump, scream, feel a little terrified at times. This has been 100 in 100, where we are reviewing 100 VR games in 100 days. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and click the notification bell so you can get a notification tomorrow when we release another VR Gear game review. Thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next one.